The next piece of this is to start working with the target divs, because what we want to do is add some code to address the target divs so that they will, number one, allow the draggable items to be dropped onto them, because by default you cannot drop a draggable event or a draggable item onto another div. That's the default behavior, does not allow that. So the first thing we have to do is say, hey, we're not going to do the default thing. We're going to actually allow that. And then the second part of it is, what do we do with that data once the item is dropped into each category? So first thing we need to do is we're going to use the target divs collection again for each. And we're going to use the generic div for this. And for each div, we are going to do what? We are going to add an event listener, first of all. And this is going to be a fairly long block of code that we're going to do for each div. So hang in there. We're going to just start with the first part. The first thing we're going to do is what happens when we drag something over a target div. So when we drag something over a target div, we're going to have that target div respond by changing its class. So we want to say div dot add event listener, and we're going to say drag over. So when we drag something over it, and again, anonymous function here, and the anonymous function, oops, we need to put the event in there so we can grab that event when we need it. And we're going to say event prevent default. That's the first thing. That says, hey, allow this thing to be dragged over and dropped on you potentially. So don't do what you would normally do. Okay, so we're going to say also to that div, we are going to add a class. So we're going to say div.add or div.classlist.add. And the class that we're going to add is called Dragover. And that class, you can see, is defined somewhere up here. There it is, Dragover, target div.dragover. Okay, and that all it does is change the border to green. So it's just going to change the border to green. It won't change anything else. You could change the background. You could do all kinds of stuff if you wanted to. So let's just stick with the changing the border to green. And of course, you can play around with that later. So back to our code here. Every time we drag something over one of the target divs, the prevent default says, hey, let's let this happen. So we can, this is sort of a setup for the be able to drop it later. But also we are going to add the class Dragover. Now, for this to work, because right now if I test this, you can see everything just changes green and then it stays green. So when I drag it in, it changes green, but when I drag it out, it needs to go back to the regular color, because that feedback doesn't work if it doesn't go back to the regular color. So what we need to do is when we drag out, we need to be able to go back to the regular old border color. So we're going to say div add event listener, and the event list we're listening for is called Dragleave. That's when something gets dragged on and then dragged back off again. So function, event, anonymous function here. So this is a second event listener here. And all we're going to do here is say div class list remove Dragover. So we're just taking that Dragover class and taking it back, or taking it away, which makes the border back to its normal color. So let's test it out. And you can see now that as I drag in, we're turning green, and as I leave, they're turning back to the normal color. So that nice little piece of visual feedback is there, and so far so good. But what else do we need to do? We need to do something a little bit different in order to make sure that when I drop something in here, that something big happens, meaning that it's added to that category. So that's the next step.